as a preface to this, please don't freak out because that's not cool. It's difficult enough for her without people freaking out. So I'm married to a woman who has never appeared in our videos. Her name is Sarah, but you guys call her the Yeti because she is prominent in our folklore but has never actually made an appearance in our videos. She is flying into events when she can to say hi, when we can give childcare, which is really nice of her, and I'm so glad that she can be here tonight, so she wants to come out and say hi. My wife, Sarah.
Commitment's what I'm picking up. You wouldn't get this from any other guy. I just wanna tell you how I'm feeling. Don't tell me you're too blind to see. I'm never gonna give you up. I'm never gonna let you down. I'm never gonna run around and hurt you. I'm not gonna make you cry. I'm never gonna say goodbye. I'm never gonna tell a lie or desert you. I don't know any more of the words of this song.
Good job. That's no, I was kidding. Yeah, that's called getting Hank rolled, for those of you who don't know. I'm sorry that I just Hank rolled you, I apologize, but it was necessary. Because, by the way, if you don't know what getting Hank rolled is, I can't explain it to you because it involves like 11 different internet jokes. I'm going to answer some questions about The Fault in Our Stars, assuming this thing works. So guys, don't freak out. No heckling, please. I freak out when people talk to me and I'm on stage because I have terrible social anxiety, so I pretend that you aren't here and it's really effective. But then, when you give evidence of yourself, I really freak out. Okay, so I'm going to set this timer to 11 minutes, and if I go over my time, I will be punished with this terrible shocking device, which is right here, and it's genuinely awful. It really hurts, and we don't like it. I've been trained over the course of this tour to really hate and fear the shocking device, so I'm going to try to avoid it. You submitted questions via note card about my book, The Fault in Our Stars. I'm now going to read some of those questions, and maybe take questions from the audience if we have time, but these are really good questions, so we may not. I apologize. When writing The Fault in Our Stars, did you want to give your readers a similar reaction to Hazel and Augustus's relationship with an imperial affliction? Well, no, because how presumptuous would that have been? You know, to be like, Hazel's favorite book is called An Imperial Affliction, and I shall write the world's favorite book. Yeah. So, no, I didn't. But I'm very glad, I'm very grateful if any of you like the book at all. I'm more grateful, obviously, it's amazing if anybody feels that kind of connection to the book. I wrote Hazel's relationship with an imperial affliction that way because when I was a teenager, I had that relationship, not just with one book, but with several. That relationship where the book seems to exist outside of the world, and also, some of my books contain some ambiguity, and I've received many emails from readers like the ones that Hazel sends and help me. Another question: who's Annie Koonin? Can you raise your hand? Hi, Annie. How old are you? All right, so Annie's 16. I just want to state that for the record. In the poem Certain Sign of Life by Emily Dickinson, the imperial affliction is portrayed as an affliction which gives the sufferer some kind of imperial honor. I always assumed that imperial affliction referred to imperialism in the sense that it required growth out of control, like Hazel and Augustus's cancer. In which sense did you mean it in the title of An Imperial Affliction? So, yay, Annie. So, I have I want to use that question mostly to respond to the question that I often get, which is, do teenagers really talk/think like that? Yes. I mean, not all teenagers do, but there are people like Annie in this world. And so, I'm writing about you, not to freak you out. I'm sure you're fine. So that's a really interesting question. I thought a lot about that famous phrase in the poem, certain slant of light, which is it's an imperial affliction sent of the air, Emily Dickinson writes. There is something imperial or emperor-like about suffering. There is something supposedly, we are taught, transcendent about suffering. At one point in the novel, Peter Van Houten recalls the story of this young woman who died at a very early age and may someday become a Catholic saint, who famously said, pain is like fabric. The more it holds, the more it's worth. And Van Houten asks Hazel if she thinks that's true, and Hazel says that no, she thinks it's bull. I'm paraphrasing. I wanted to call it an imperial affliction because I wanted Van Houten to be struggling with the question of whether pain has value, and whether the sort of suffering that people go through when they live, oftentimes go through when they live with cancer, is transcendent in some ways. If it does give you some special knowledge, if it does awaken your senses to the beauty of life or whatever. Because in my experience, that's a very complicated question to answer. In some ways, people who are very sick do know things that the rest of us don't, but in a lot of ways they don't. And I think sometimes we immortalize them before they die, which is a terrible, terrible thing to do to someone, because someone who's living is living. It doesn't matter if they're dying, they're alive now. They're here now, they're able to be funny and to be alive and to observe the universe with us, to have relationships with us that can grow and shrink, that can wax and wane, and it's really important to be honest about that, because otherwise you end up just turning these people into sort of simple heroes. And there's nothing fun about being a simple hero or being simply romanticized. So that was really important to me. That's a really interesting question. Did writing The Fault in Our Stars make you cry? Yes. Yes. Thanks. I'm sure that the baristas at Starbucks thought that I was a crazy person. Like, why does that guy come in every morning at 7:30, cry for 4 hours, and leave? Yeah, I did. I mean, you know, it did, much more than anything else I've ever written. I mean, I cried when I was writing Looking for Alaska, and I cried when I finished Paper Towns, but I think it was just relief. I remember it being like a cupcake store in New York with Maureen Johnson, which is where we wrote every day, and she looked up and she was like, "Are you crying?" Because the idea of crying is so foreign to Maureen. And I said, "Yes," and she said, "Why are you crying?" And I said, "I think because I'm done." I got very emotional about this book. It's much closer to me than anything I've ever written, except maybe Looking for Alaska, because it's been with me for so long, because I've been working on it for so long. And so when I felt like things were going okay, when I felt like I was getting something down that was going to be in the finished book, I was crying regardless of whether it was happy or sad. I don't want to go over my time because I'm so scared of the thing. Hazel's opinion of an imperial affliction changes after she meets Van Houten. That's not a spoiler. It's really not, genuinely. What are the drawbacks, benefits of having readers who feel like they know you intimately? That's a really, and then there's a continuation of this very interesting question. As creators become more accessible to their fans, how do you think that might change storytelling, if at all? Which is a really interesting question. Amanda, are you here? Are you a teenager? No. Okay, that explains why you're so smart. Just kidding, teenagers. You all ask lovely questions. Well, actually, can I just by like applause or hands? Hands. How many of you are teenagers? And then how many of you are older than teenagers? All right. Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Just for marketing. That's a really interesting question, Amanda. When I published Paper Towns, I became aware for the first time that my readers were connecting my life to the book in ways that made me extremely uncomfortable, not because they knew who I was, but because it was drawing them out of the narrative. So they'd be reading the story, and they'd be like, "Oh, John just used the phrase troll hole. I know that he saw in an abandoned building in Detroit, someone had broken a hole through a wall and in spray paint written troll hole so that you could get from one building to the other." And all of a sudden, they were able to connect my life to the book. And when they were reading this novel that I'd made up, they'd be drawn out of the narrative. And they'd be conscious that the story was written by someone, and that they kind of, in some ways, knew that person. And that sucked for me. I really hated it. I don't know if you guys hate it, but I hated it as an author because I just want to write you a story that's a story, that's a novel, that's made up. I believe in the viability and importance of made-up stories, and I'm not particularly interested in the weird in-between space of constructed stories that are mostly true, a la, you know, every reality television show, which if you watch the credits closely always has a story writer who is like, Kim, I think that you should have a fight with Chloe now, and it should be in a store. And then they'll find a store to sponsor them, and they'll go to that store, and Chloe will be like, Kim, we need to talk about your engagement. Well, that was written by a story writer. The actual words probably felt and definitely said by Ms. and Ms. Kardashian, but you know, it was written in the sense of being a constructed narrative. Well, I mean, there is something to the fact that all novels are like that. On some level, all novels are like that, right? They come from my mind. It wasn't like God told me what to write and I wrote it down. I'm aware of the fact that like I made up the story, and the story is limited by the limits of my talent and also by the limits of my observational capabilities. But I don't want you to be aware of that, except as is absolutely necessary. So I like having a relationship with you, but I think it's a really interesting point that you make, that as authors know their readers in a way that extends outside the life of books, will that in some way make reading novels more like watching reality television shows? And I sincerely hope not. And certainly with this book, I was much more protective, because while I was writing most of it, I was more aware of the fact that you would be reading it. I was much more protective. But look, I made that joke in 2008. I think I made that joke about hurdlers that I made in the reading. I said in a video that, like, you know, life sometimes feels like arbitrary hurdles have been set in your path, and this would just go faster if we removed the hurdles. And I'm sure some people were drawn out of the narrative there. And it's just inevitable that I have to be conscious of the fact that, like, most of the people who read my books don't know that I make videos on the internet. And most of the people who watch my videos on the internet don't read my books. So, well, it's true. Believe me, if either of those groups were as large as the other group, I would be happy. I have numbers. So that's a really fascinating question, and I don't have a great answer to it, but I was more conscious of it in this book. Sorry, I'm so scared. I'm so scared. Oh God, I only have 20 seconds left. Whew. In Paper Towns and Tipios, you described both Hazel and Margot's nail polish as so blank it's almost black. I was wondering, what's your fascination with this type of nail polish? Asks Emma. Can you raise your hands if you're wearing a nail polish that's so blank it's almost black? So that's my fascination. I just like those people. I'm just into you guys. Not in a creepy way.